What I have here in my hand is truly quite remarkable. Little Miss Nobody Me is reading from a document that has been hidden in the Vatican for centuries. It is the Acta Pilati, or the letter of Pontius Pilate to the Emperor Tiberius Caesar concerning the arrest, crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it begins with how the editor came into possession of this document. The following remarkable document, like many other invaluable parchments that have never been published to the world, has until now been literally concealed among the 24,000 manuscripts in the penetralia of the Vatican. Its existence from the earliest periods of the Christian era is familiar to men of letters. References to it abound in all profound works concerning the historical aspects of the argument for the divine origin of Christianity. E.G. Lardner, Horn, Quito, Farrar, Andrews, and Tischendorf, many have supposed that the document had, in the course of ages, been lost, but as the Codex Sinaiticus manuscript of the New Testament was concealed from the world until 1844, when it was brought to light by the indefatigable zeal of Dr. Constantine Tischendorf. So strange to say, this important testimony to Christ was not accessible until about 20 years ago. A learned man of Germany, not a theologian, spent some 5 years in Rome consulting the library of the Vatican. He became well acquainted with the chief custodian and enjoyed unusual liberties. He finally gained access even to the ancient manuscripts, the most valuable collection in the world, embracing one of the oldest codices of the Bible. To his surprise and pleasure, he came upon a collection called the Emperor Tiberius Caesar's Court, and among the strange and curious state papers here deposited, he happened upon the famous official report of the prefect Pontius Pilate concerning the trial and crucifixion of Christ. As he was not personally interested in theological studies, the subject passed from his mind. But some years afterwards, he came to the United States and happened to be the guest of a clergyman. In the course of conversation concerning Rome and the Vatican, the matter was recalled to his recollection, and he mentioned that he had seen and read the Acta Pilati. It seems that the statement made a deep impression upon the mind of the latter, although it had been accompanied with the opinion that it did not add much to the common teachings of Christianity. Several months elapsed, but the statement of the learned German clung to the clergyman's memory. At last he could not forbear to write to him in New York City, reminding him of the Acta Pilati and asking whether it would not be possible to obtain a transcript of it from the Vatican. But he had already returned to his home in Westphalia. The letter was, however, forwarded, and finally, after much delay, an answer came, stating that he had written to Father Frelinghuysen, a monk of great learning at Rome and custodian of the Vatican. He also stated that he had made the request in his own name, as he did not think the papal authorities would be willing for such a document to go into the hands of the public. Father Frelinghuysen expressed himself as willing to furnish the transcript. The parchment being old and defaced, he was compelled to use a magnifying glass in transcribing it. It was in the original Latin and accompanied by the following letter. Rome, Italy, April 26, 1859. I hereby forward you the transcript as it is on record in the Vatican in Tiberius Caesar's court by Pilate. I certify this to be a true copy, word for word, as it occurs there. Peter Frelinghuysen. For 20 years, its owner has kept it as a private literary treasure. Not until now has he been induced by the importunate urgency of many esteemed friends to give it to the world, as being the most ancient, non-biblical testimony about Christ, antedating even the first of the Gospels and epistles. It will be read with feelings of peculiar interest and even awe. Its publication will be welcomed by thousands who have seen references to it, and by all to whom this is the first notice of its existence. Without claiming that the Acta Pilati add materially to the sum of details furnished in the Gospels, they will nevertheless silence forever the cavils of all who have sneeringly asked why profane historians have not mentioned the introduction of Christianity into the world. Indeed, there is now accessible a complete chain of non-biblical testimony, each link comprising an important item in the life of our Savior. That Caesar Augustus ordered the whole world to be taxed, we learn from Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dion. That a great light or star appeared in the east from Chalcidius. The cruelty of Herod, even to the point of slaughtering innocent children and putting to death his own sons, is mentioned by Josephus. That our Savior had been in Egypt by Celsus. That Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea by Tacitus. That miraculous cures and works out of the ordinary course of nature were wrought by Christ is distinctly stated by Julian the Apostate, Porphyry, and Hierocles. That Jesus made predictions which came to pass, and the earthquake and darkness when he died by phlegm, and the immediate causes which led to the crucifixion and the particulars of his trial in the official report of Pilate himself. The estimation in which the Acta Pilati were held by the apostolic fathers and early defenders of Christianity. The early fathers of the Church deemed this document of the highest authority and value. Justin Martyr, in his first apology for the Christians, which was presented to the Emperor Antonius Pius in the year AD 138, having mentioned that the crucifixion of Jesus and some of its attendant circumstances, says, "And that these things were so done, you may know from the acts made in the time of Pontius Pilate." Afterwards, in the same apology, having noticed some of our Lord's miracles, such as healing diseases and raising the dead, he says, "And that these things were done by him, you may know by the acts made in the time of Pontius Pilate." Apollo Prima 6572. And here we go. Pontius Pilate to the Emperor Tiberius. Greeting. Recent events in my province have been of such a character that I thought I would give the details as they have occurred, as I should not be surprised if in the course of time they may change the destiny of our nation, for it seems of late that the gods have ceased to be propitious. I am almost ready to say, cursed be the day that I succeeded Valerian's Gratus in the government of Judea. On my arrival at Jerusalem, I took possession of the Praetorium and ordered a splendid feast to be prepared, to which I invited the Tetrarch of Galilee, with the high priests and his officers. At the appointed hour, no guests appeared. This was an insult offered to my dignity. A few days after, the high priest deigned to pay me a visit. His deportment was grave and deceitful. He pretended that his religion forbade him and his attendants to sit down at the table of the Romans and to offer up libations with them. I thought it expedient to accept his excuse, but from the moment I was convinced that the conquered had declared themselves the enemies of the conquerors. It seemed to me, of all conquered cities, Jerusalem was the most difficult to govern. So turbulent were the people that I lived in momentary dread of an insurrection. To suppress it, I had but a single centurion and a handful of soldiers. I requested a reinforcement from the prefect of Syria, who informed me that he had scarcely troops sufficient to defend his own province. An insatiate thirst for conquest, to extend our empire beyond the means of defending it, I fear, will be the means of destroying our noble government. Among the various rumors that came to my ears, there was one that attracted my attention in particular. A young man, it was said, had appeared in Galilee preaching with a noble unction, a new law in the name of the gods that had sent him. At first I was apprehensive that his design was to stir up the people against the Romans, but soon were my fears dispelled. Jesus of Nazareth spake rather as a friend of the Romans than of the Jews. One day, in passing by the place of Silo, where there was a great concourse of people, I observed in the midst of the group a young man who was leaning against a tree, calmly addressing the multitude. I was told it was Jesus. This I could easily have suspected, so great was the difference between him and those who were listening to him. His golden-colored hair and beard gave to his appearance a celestial aspect. He appeared to be about 30 years of age. Never have I seen a sweeter or more serene countenance. What a contrast between him and his hearers, with their black beards and tawny complexion. Unwilling to interrupt him by my presence, I continued my walk, but signified to my secretary to join the group and listen. My secretary's name was Manlius. He was the grandson of the chief of the conspirators who encamped in Etruria waiting Catiline. Manlius was an ancient inhabitant of Judea and well acquainted with the Hebrew language. He was devoted to me and worthy of my confidence. On entering the praetorium, I found Manlius, who related to me the words Jesus had pronounced at Silo. Never have I heard in the Pentateuch, nor in the works of the philosophers, anything that compared to the maxims of Jesus. One of the rebellious Jews, so numerous in Jerusalem, having asked him if it was lawful to give tribute to Caesar, Jesus replied, "Render unto Caesar the things which belong to Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's." It was on account of the wisdom of this saying that I granted so much liberty to the Nazarene, for it was in my power to have him arrested and exiled to Pontus. But this would have been contrary to the justice which has always characterized the Romans. This man was neither seditious nor rebellious. I extended to him my protection, unknown perhaps to himself. He was at liberty to act, to speak, to assemble, and address the people, to choose disciples unrestrained by any praetorian mandate. Should it ever happen, may the gods ever avert the omen, should it ever happen, I say, that the religion of our forefathers be supplanted by the religion of Jesus, it will be to this noble toleration that Rome shall owe her premature obsequies. While I, miserable wretch, shall have been the instrument of what the Hebrews call providence, and we destiny. But this unlimited freedom granted to Jesus provoked the Jews, not the poor, but the rich and powerful. It is true that Jesus was severe on the latter, and this was a political reason, in my opinion, not to control the liberty of the Nazarene. "Scribes and Pharisees," he would say to them, "you are a race of vipers. You resemble painted sepulchres." At other times he would sneer at the proud alms of the publican, telling him that the mite of the poor widow was more precious in the sight of God. New complaints were daily made at the praetorium against the insolence of Jesus. I was even informed that some misfortune would befall him, that it would not be the first time that Jerusalem had stoned those who called themselves prophets. And if the praetorium refused justice, an appeal would be made to Caesar. However, my conduct was approved by the Senate, and I was promised a reinforcement after the termination of the Parthian War. Being too weak to suppress a sedition, I resolved upon adopting a measure that promised to establish the tranquility of the city without subjecting the praetorium to humiliating concession. I wrote to Jesus requesting an interview with him at the praetorium. You know that in my veins flows the Spanish mixed with the Roman blood, as incapable of fear as it is of puerile emotion. When the Nazarene made his appearance, I was walking in my basilica, and my feet seemed fastened with an iron hand to the marble pavement, and I trembled in every limb as a guilty culprit. Though he was calm, the Nazarene, calm as innocence. When he came up to me, he stopped, and by a signal sign, he seemed to say to me, I am here. For some time I contemplated with admiration and awe this extraordinary type of man, a type of man unknown to our numerous painters who have given form and figure to all the gods and heroes. Jesus, I said to him at last, and my tongue faltered. Jesus of Nazareth, I have granted you for the last 3 years ample freedom of speech, nor do I regret it. Your words are those of a sage. I know not whether you have read Socrates or Plato, but this I know, that there is in your discourses a majestic simplicity that elevates you far above these philosophers. The emperor is informed of it, and I, his humble representative in this country, am glad of having allowed you that liberty of which you are so worthy. However, I must not conceal from you that your discourses have raised up against you powerful and inveterate enemies. Neither is this surprising. Socrates had his enemies, and he fell a victim of their hatred. Yours are doubly incensed against you on account of your sayings against them, and on account of the liberty extended towards you. They even accused me of being indirectly leagued with you for the purpose of depriving the Hebrews of the little civil power which Rome has left them. My request, I do not say my order, is that you be more circumspect in the future and more tender in arousing the pride of your enemies, lest they raise against you the stupid populace and compel me to employ the instruments of justice. The Nazarene calmly replied, Prince of the earth, your words proceed not from true wisdom. Say to the torrent, stop in the midst of the mountain home, because it will uproot the trees of the valley. The torrent will answer you that it must obey the laws of the Creator. God alone knows whither flows the torrent. Verily I say unto you, before the rose of Sharon blossoms, the blood of the just shall be spilt. Your blood shall not be spilt, replied I with emotion. You are more precious in my estimation on account of your wisdom than all the turbulent and proud Pharisees who abuse the freedom granted them by the Romans, and conspire against Caesar, and construe our bounty into fear. Insolent wretches, they are not aware that the wolf of the Tiber sometimes clothes himself with the skin of the sheep. I will protect you against them. My praetorium is open to you as an asylum. It is a sacred asylum. Jesus carelessly shook his head and said with a grace and a divine smile, When the day shall have come, there will be no asylum for the Son of Man, neither in the earth nor under the earth. The asylum of the just is there, pointing to the heavens. That which is written in the books of the prophets must be accomplished. Young man, answered I mildly, you oblige me to convert my request into an order. The safety of the province which has been confided to my care requires it. You must observe more moderation in your discourses. Do not infringe my orders, you know. May happiness attend you. Farewell. Prince of the earth, replied Jesus, I come not to bring war into the world, but peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day on which Augustus Caesar gave peace to the Roman world. Persecution proceeds not from me. I expect it from others and will meet in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the way. Restrain, therefore, your worldly prudence. It is not in your power to arrest the victim at the foot of the tabernacle of expiation." So saying, he disappeared like a bright shadow behind the curtains of the basilica. To Herod, who then reigned in Galilee, the enemies of Jesus addressed themselves to wreak their vengeance on the Nazarene. Had Herod consulted his own inclination, he would have ordered Jesus immediately to be put to death. But though proud of his royal dignity, yet he was afraid of committing an act that might diminish his influence with the Senate. Herod called on me one day at the Praetorium, and on rising to take leave after some insignificant conversation, he asked me what was my opinion concerning the Nazarene. I replied that Jesus appeared to be one of those great philosophers that great nations sometimes produce, that his doctrines are by no means sacrilegious, and that the intention of Rome was to leave him to that freedom of speech which was justified by his actions. Herod smiled maliciously, and saluting me with an ironical respect, he departed. The great feast of the Jews was approaching, and the intention was to avail themselves of the popular exultation which always manifests itself at the solemnities of a Passover. The city was overflowing with a tumultuous populace clamoring for the death of the Nazarene. My emissaries informed me that the treasure of the temple had been employed in bribing the people. The danger was pressing. A Roman centurion had been insulted. I wrote to the prefect of Syria for 100-foot soldiers and as many cavalry. He declined. I saw myself alone with a handful of veterans in the midst of a rebellious city, too weak to suppress a disorder and having no other choice left but to tolerate it. They had seized upon Jesus and the seditious rabble, although they had nothing to fear from the Praetorium, believing with their leaders that I winked at their sedition, continued vociferating, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" 3 powerful parties had combined together at that time against Jesus. First, the Herodians and the Sadducees, whose seditious conduct seemed to have proceeded from double motives. They hated the Nazarene and are impatient of the Roman yoke. They could never forgive me for having entered the holy city with banners that bore the image of the Roman emperor, and although in this instance I had committed a fatal error, yet the sacrilege did not appear less heinous in their eyes. Another grievance also rankled in their bosoms. I had proposed to employ a part of the treasure of the temple in erecting edifices of public utility. My proposal was scowled at. The Pharisees were the avowed enemies of Jesus. They cared not for the government. They bore with bitterness the severe reprimands which the Nazarene for 3 years had been continually throwing out against them wherever he went. Too weak and pusillanimous to act by themselves, they had embraced the quarrels of the Herodians and the Sadducees. Besides these 3 parties, I had to contend against the reckless and prolific populace, always ready to join a sedition, and to profit by the disorder and confusion that resulted therefrom. Jesus was dragged before the high priest and condemned to death. It was then that the high priest, Caiaphas, performed a derisory act of submission. He sent his prisoner to me to pronounce his condemnation and secure his execution. I answered him that as Jesus was a Galilean, the affair came in Herod's jurisdiction and ordered him to be sent hither. The wily tetrarch professed humility, and protesting his preference to the lieutenant of Caesar, he committed the fate of the man to my hands. Soon my palace assumed the aspect of a besieged citadel. Every moment increased the number of the seditionists. Jerusalem was inundated with crowds from the mountains of Nazareth. All Judea appeared to be pouring into the devoted city. I had taken a wife, a girl from among the Gauls, who professed to see into futurity. Weeping and throwing herself at my feet, "Beware," said she to me, "beware and touch not that man, for he is holy. Last night I saw him in a vision. He was walking on the waters. He was flying on the wings of the winds. He spoke to the tempest, and the fishes of the lake all were obedient to him. Behold, the torrent in Mount Kedron flows with blood. The statues of Caesar are filled with Gemoni. The columns of the interim have given away, and the sun is veiled in mourning like a vestal in the tomb. O Pilate, evil awaits thee if thou wilt not listen to the vows of thy wife. Dread the curse of a Roman Senate. Dread the power of Caesar." By this time the marble stairs groaned under the weight of the multitude. The Nazarene was brought back to me. I proceeded to the hall of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. "The death of the Nazarene," was the reply. "For what crime?" "He has blasphemed. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews." "Roman justice," said I, "punishes not such offenses with death." "Crucify him! Crucify him!" belched forth the relentless rabble. The vociferations of the infuriated mob shook the palace to its foundations. There was but one who appeared to be calm in the midst of the vast multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from this fury of his merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me to be the only one that could save his life. I ordered him to be scourged. Then, calling for an ewer, I washed my hands in the presence of the multitude, thereby signifying to them my disapproval of the deed. But in vain. It was his life that these wretches thirsted for. Often in our civil commotions have I witnessed the furious animosity of the multitude, but nothing could be compared to what I witnessed in the present instance. It might have been truly said that on this occasion all the phantoms of the infernal regions had assembled at Jerusalem. The crowd appeared not to walk. They were borne off and whirled as a vertex, rolling along like living waves. From the portals of the Praetorium even unto Mount Zion, with howling, screams, shrieks, and vociferations, such as were never heard in the seditions of the Pannonia, or in the tumult of the Forum. By degrees the day darkened like a winter's twilight, such as had been at the death of the great Julius Caesar. It was likewise towards the Ides of March. I, the continued governor of a rebellious province, was leaning against a column of my basilica, contemplating athwart the dreary gloom of these fiends of Tartars dragging to execution the innocent Nazarene. All around me was deserted. Jerusalem had vomited forth her indwellers through the funeral gate that leads to the Germanica. An air of desolation and sadness enveloped me. My guards had joined the cavalry, and the centurion, to display a shadow of power, was endeavoring to keep order. I was left alone, and my breaking heart admonished me that what was passing at that moment appertained rather to the history of the gods than that of a man. a loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which, borne on the winds, seemed to announce an agony such as had never been heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, and settling over the city, covered it with a veil. So dreadful were the signs that were seen both in the heavens and on the earth, that Dionysius, an Areopagite, is reported to have exclaimed, "Either the author of nature is suffering or the universe is falling apart." Towards the first hour of the night, I threw my mantle around me and went down into the city toward the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was consummated. The crowd was returning home, still agitated, it is true, but gloomy, taciturn, and desperate. What they had witnessed had stricken them with terror and remorse. I also saw my little Roman cohort pass by mournfully, the standard-bearer having veiled his eagle in token of grief, and I overheard some of the soldiers murmuring strange words which I did not understand. Others were recounting prodigies almost similar to those which had so often smitten the Romans by the will of the gods. Sometimes groups of men and women would halt, then looking backward toward Golgotha would remain motionless in expectation of witnessing some new prodigy. I returned to the praetorium sad and pensive. On ascending the stairs, the steps of which are still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, I perceived an old man in a suppliant posture, and behind him several women in tears. He threw himself at my feet and wept bitterly. It is painful to see an old man weep. "Father," said I to him mildly, "who are you and what is your request?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," replied he, "and I am come to beg of you upon my knees the permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." "Your prayer is granted," said I to him, and at the same time ordered Manlius to take some soldiers with him to superintend the interment, lest it should be profaned. A few days after the sepulchre was found empty, his disciples published all over the country that Jesus had risen from the dead as he had foretold. A last duty remained for me to perform, and that was to communicate to you these deplorable events. I did it on the same night that followed the fatal catastrophe, and had just finished the communication when day began to dawn. At that moment, the sound of clarions playing the air of Diana struck my ear. Casting my eye towards the Caesarean gate, I beheld a troop of soldiers and heard at a distance other trumpets sounding Caesar's march. It was the reinforcement that had been promised me. 2,000 chosen troops who, to hasten their arrival, had marched all night. "It has been decreed by the fates," cried I, wringing my hands, "that the great iniquity should be accomplished, that for the purpose of averting the deeds of yesterday, troops should arrive today. Cruel destiny, how thou shortest with the affairs of mortals." It was but too true, what the Nazarene exclaimed while writhing on the cross, "All is consummated."